There are moments in every person's life when they face intense adversity. They're crucibles that forge who they become as individuals and as leaders. Now more than ever, we need leaders who are called to a higher standard, focused on leaving it better than they found it, and paying it forward to the next generations. Now, let's join Fire Chief Randy Brugman as he speaks with leaders from all walks of life, as he explores and learns from their personal journeys and the crucibles that have forged them into better leaders and better people.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Leadership Crucible podcast. Today it's my pleasure to have on the show Kim Anthony. Kim has worked as a sports reporter for ESPN and hosted 3 television shows in Miami, Florida. She has appeared as a guest on TV and radio programs like Focus on the Family, a 2012 Best of the Best broadcast, Family Life Today, 700 Club, 100 Huntley Street, and Full Circle. Kim has authored an inspiring story detailing her journey from pain to purpose in her memoir, Unfavorable Odds. In it, she shares how she overcame growing up in an environment surrounded by drugs, violence, and financial hardships, and went on to become a member of the US National Gymnastics Team and the first African-American female to receive a scholarship to compete for UCLA Gymnastics. There she became a 6-time All-American and a 4-time national champion. Kim was inducted into the UCLA Hall of Fame in 2000, the Virginia Sports Hall of Fame in 2017, and was listed as one of the legends making up the Pac-12 All-Century Gymnastics Team in 2016. Unfavorable Odds is a book that crosses social, economic, and cultural barriers. It feeds the soul of the reader with inspiration to persevere and courage to overcome. Kim Anthony has 2 adult children and currently resides in Southwest Ohio with Corwin, her husband of 29 years. Well, Kim, welcome to the Leadership Crucible podcast. It's an honor to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, goodness, it's an honor to be here.
You know, I was reading your book, Unfavorable Odds, which in fact I'm almost done. This is an inspirational story, and you know,
so much.
Yeah, your journey from growing up in Richmond to being where you are today is quite remarkable. You know, the challenging environment that you grew up in, to become one of the first black gymnasts in the 70s and 80s and the first at UCLA, and overcoming the racial barriers that were unfortunately very, very prevalent at that time. So could you just share your journey with the audience today? Because it's remarkable.
Yeah, so I was one of those kids. My family members tell me that I was more upside down than I was right side up. So I was always flipping around. I'd get on top of fences. We had this flat fence in my grandmother's backyard, and I would just walk across that and just flip around and had not seen the sport of gymnastics before. But in 1976, I watched the Olympics, and Nadia was competing there. And I realized that all of the little things that I was doing, the flips and turns and balances were, it was a sport. It was something that people actually did in an organized manner. And after that, I just thought, okay, this is it for me. And I began to flip around in my grandmother's living room, knocked over lamps and tables and all that good stuff, got kicked outside onto the brick sidewalks on a busy city street. And she wouldn't let me take her pillows out. So I had to be smart. And I began to teach myself side aerials, which is a cartwheel with no hands. And I did roundoffs and cartwheels and all sorts of things. My mom would come home on the bus and she would walk from the bus stop, and I'd always run up to her or my grandmother and I'd say, "Hey, look what I can do." And I'd start flipping around, and she thought I was going to hurt myself. So she decided to get me into a recreational gymnastics class to try to get that energy out. And we took the bus over because we didn't have a car. It was, we took 2 buses to get there. It was all the way across the other side of town. And when I stepped into that gym, it was like the angels were singing because there were all of these mats, soft mats and equipment that I had never seen in person before. And throughout my class, I kept getting in trouble because when I was supposed to be on the low beam, I was on the high beam. When I was supposed to be on the low bar, I was on the high bar, doing all of these things that, I don't know what I was doing, but evidently it caught the eye of the coach, and he called me over at the end of that class, that first class. And he asked me where I had taken gymnastics lessons before. And I told him I've never taken lessons. I just flip on the sidewalk outside of my grandmother's house. And he invited me to join the team that very day.
Wow.
So,
well, yeah,
yes.
I mean, the story of you kind of doing flips and cartwheels off of your front porch onto the sidewalk, I'm just having visions of, that's dangerous.
It is, yes. My mother thought so too. That's why she got me into those classes. And it's interesting because I didn't have a leotard during that first class. I think I had a t-shirt and shorts on, and I needed a leotard in order to be on their competitive team, which I was invited to do. And so they had a pro shop there. And they had me pick out a leotard. It was this green V-neck polyester long sleeve leotard. I still have it, believe it or not. And that was 40 something years ago. So they had me pick out the leotard, but my mother could not afford to pay for it. And I think it may have been $8 or $12, something like that. And they told her that she could pay them back when she had the money. So they were very gracious to us.
Well, and I think your home life actually was an interesting story too, because you didn't come from an affluent background. In fact, just the opposite. And your home life was a little bit upside down at times. And your influences there in your home were, one was extremely positive and grounded, and the other not so much. And so, a little bit about that would, I think, be very interesting to hear.
Yes. When you think about gymnastics, you don't think about someone living in poverty and being a gymnast. It just doesn't go together. And especially back in the 70s, that was not the case. So my life was quite different from my teammates in that we did live in poverty. And my mom worked 3 jobs. And one of those jobs included cleaning the 20,000 square foot gym. There were times when I would come home from school and I'd find eviction notices on the front door and this bright neon sign. And I remember being so embarrassed, and I would just run, across the parking lot and try to snatch that sign down as soon as possible so my friends wouldn't see it. And then I would step inside of our living room, which was empty because we couldn't afford furniture. And the way we even ended up in that apartment was because of gymnastics, actually. And my mom and I, we often lived with relatives because we couldn't afford a place of our own. And we lived with my grandmother, her mother, for many years. And it was there when I discovered my talent and was invited to be on the team. We were living with her. So my mom had to save up money to get us into an apartment because I had to start training 5 days a week and we didn't have a car. And it was very difficult for us to find people who were willing to take me back and forth to practice, from 4 o'clock to 9 o'clock at night. And my mom sacrificed. So instead of her being able to get to work easily, she moved us across town so that I could live in walking distance of the gym, so I could go there and train every day. But that meant that she had to be on the bus for 2 hours, commuting each day. And then we had to raise money because, of course, she couldn't afford to pay for my training. So one of the unique ways we raised money was through a coat check stand at a nightclub. Randy, we were in a nightclub, and I think I may have been 12, 13 years old at the time. And we had these hangers, these wire hangers we got from the local cleaners. We put numbers on them. And my dad was with us at that time. So it was the 3 of us. And then we would take people's hat and coats for $1 or $2 that night. And then around 1 o'clock in the morning, they would clear the dance floor. And underneath the disco ball, I would perform my gymnastics routines so that everybody could see where their money was going. Can you imagine how embarrassing that was? for me. So it was an experience nonetheless. And then we'd have to pack up our hangers and walk 10 miles home because the buses weren't running that late.
Yeah, that was a very powerful piece in your book, and you would sing all the way home, right?
Yes. We did a lot of We did a lot of walking and a lot of singing to pass the time.
Yeah.
We loved doing that.
Yeah, it was, and then when you went to, and I mean and I would again encourage people to read your book, but there's a lot of passages in there where you go from one piece of your life to the next, and one of the ones that really caught my attention was when you landed at UCLA, because that was just such a major shift for you as far as environment, and it was just totally different. And I'm trying to put myself in your place, going, this is just like you went to a totally different world.
Mm-hmm. It was literally a different world. So I'm coming from riding a bus. I think my mom may have had a car by then, but think about it. Before UCLA, I was living in these two different worlds. When I went away to gymnastics competitions, sometimes I was staying in 5-star hotels. We had police escorts. There were limousines sometimes, and so that was a different world. And then I went to UCLA to live. And the kids were driving BMWs and Porsches, and I just thought, oh my goodness, I can barely afford my food, much less drive this fancy sports car as a college student. So it was very different. I felt like I didn't fit in. There were not very many African Americans, not very many Black students at all, and even some of the students that I met, they weren't too sure about me because I was on the gymnastics team, which was a rare thing. They had, I evidently, some people thought that because I was on the gymnastics team, that meant that I dropped my culture, that I was no longer Black, I was whitewashed. And those were the literal words that I heard. So it was very difficult for me to fit in anywhere, except for that gymnastics team.
Yeah, I was going to say, how long did it take, and did you ever fully feel comfortable there? It
took at least the first year for me to get comfortable. I think there was always, in different settings, an atmosphere of discomfort, because perhaps my teammates would have money to go to the movies and go out to eat. And sometimes I had to say, oh, you know what, I'm just going to stay here because I couldn't afford to go. None of them knew that. But so that's when I felt that I was out of place. And I also, there was this guy who lived on my floor. And I just out of the blue started sharing about my family life. And it must have been something involving drugs. And drugs was a part of the environment that I grew up in. And this young man looked at me like, he's just like, what? And then I said, that doesn't happen at your house? And he just said, no. And that is when I felt the most shame, because I thought that the way I grew up was just the way everybody grows up. And that's when I learned that was not the case. And I also learned that we were poor when I was at UCLA, believe it or not. And I was thinking about this last night. I took a sociology class, and in this particular day, we're studying socioeconomic status. So they have they have the salaries listed and where they fall on that scale. And I knew what my mom made each year. So I was going, and I always thought we were in the middle, like we have to be in the middle somewhere. So I'm going down and I have to turn the page. We're so far down. And then I find out that we're poor. And I thought, you know what? I have to let my mom know, because I don't think she knows this. So I go down to a payphone. I had this little card. This was when they had payphones back in the day. I was at Pauley Pavilion at the payphone, called my mom at work. And I said, Mama, do you know that we are poor? And she just laughed, Randy. She said, yeah, baby, I know. I know. And I said, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me? But she did just such a wonderful job of just caring for me, being positive, and not allowing our circumstances to define our futures.
Yeah. Yeah, that came through loud and clear. I think that her strength was just amazing. And I mean, her focus on making sure that she was very supportive of you and making sure she was positioning you to be as successful as you could be. And you took advantage of that. So, amazing person. So you talk about how you lost your voice. And what do you mean by that?
When I talk about losing my voice, it really is losing myself, losing my identity, who I am, what I stand for. And mine specifically, I'll tell you a story, if I may, about how I discovered that I lost my voice. And I was in my early 30s, I think it was, and I was working as a courtside reporter covering the NBA. And I was about to do this opening stand-up in front of 1 million or so viewers. And I could see my camera. It was on the second level of the arena. And in my earpiece, I could hear my producer, who was in the truck. And then the play-by-play and analysts were across the court doing their open. And my producer comes to me in my ear and he says, Kim, we're coming to you in 3, 2, 1. The red light on the camera comes on. I start to do my report and my mind goes completely blank. And the silence seemed to last forever. It was mortifying. But after that situation happened, I thought, you know what? There's no way. There's something wrong. I need to learn how to never do that again. So I started working with this on-air coach who couldn't find anything wrong with my delivery or methods. But then she started asking me about my family life and what life was like for me growing up. And I thought, this is weird for her to ask me these questions because that has nothing to do with this on-air coaching. But I trusted her with my story, and it was all negative. I couldn't think of a positive thing to say. I talked about how mean people were to me, how I was told I was a mistake, treated like I was a mistake, things like that. And we kept talking about that. Every week I would go back to her. We'd talk about the drama from my past. And finally, I wondered, when are we going to get to the on-air coaching that I'm actually paying her for? So one day I just said, hey, I don't want to talk about my past today. I really want to work on the on-air stuff. And I will never forget what she said. She said, Kim, we are working on the on-air stuff. Because every time that red light came on, I would revert back to this little 9-year-old girl being told that I was a mistake, being treated like I was a mistake, and worst of all, believing that I was a mistake. So because of that, what I realized is there was this situation of abuse that I had experienced growing up. And when I told the adults about it, who were caring for me at the time, instead of being believed and protected, I was punished for that. So that type of scenario continued to play out in my life. And I began to believe this lie that I had no voice and that what I said didn't matter. So what happened in my childhood led to me losing my voice as an adult. And because I believed that I didn't have a voice, I believed that what I said didn't matter, I started to use my voice as little as possible. And I didn't want to express my thoughts, my opinions, what I disagreed with. And it was very difficult for me. I agreed with what everybody else said because I didn't want to be punished.
Yeah.
I was so used to earning love and acceptance that I started to soften my voice and sometimes silence it altogether.
So how did you, that was kind of the first step in regaining your voice, but were there other steps in that journey to regain your voice?
What I realized was that I was actually listening to the lie that I didn't have a voice that I learned very early. And so what I had to do is first recognize the lie and then replace that lie with what was true. And then when I replaced it with what is true, then I had to surround myself with safe people that I could talk to, because that lie was so deeply embedded in me that I needed to be around people that I could call upon when that lie started to resurface again. I needed to have this support system, and I still have a support system to this day. And I don't think I'll ever do life without it, because I still, believe it or not, after all of these years, I still need to call on them sometimes when I have to have hard conversations with people, when I have to disappoint people with my voice. And they will help me because they value my voice. And I know that my relationship with them is not based on my performance, but it's based on them caring for me as a person.
Yeah. So your mother was a significant guiding force in your life, and can you just share a little bit about her? Because as I read your book, I was drawn to her. I would love to have had the opportunity to just sit and meet her and get to know her. So could you tell us a little bit about her?
She's an amazing woman. She went home to be with the Lord in 2017. But I know I'll see her again. And so I always still refer to her as in the current state. She is an amazing woman. She, as I shared earlier, just sacrificed for us to no end. She was my biggest cheerleader. She always told me that I could do what I desired to do. So I would come to her with these wild ideas. Hey, Mom, I want to do this. And she would say, okay, baby, you can do it. I'll support you. And she did. She didn't expect me to be perfect. She wanted me to try those things that were on my heart. And I believe that she wanted me to do that so that I would not live a life of regret, wondering, what if I would have tried that? And she encouraged me because I believe she wanted to give me a different life. And I think you mentioned a little bit about that earlier. She did not want me to repeat that cycle of poverty. She wanted me to have more, and she was willing to sacrifice in order to do that. And one of the things, she had a very strained relationship with my father. He was in and out of our lives as it was convenient to him. But throughout those years, she never, and till the day she died, she never said a single bad word about him, not a single negative word. Anything that I gathered or captured about my father's life, I learned firsthand, from living it. She never said a bad thing. I can't speak highly enough about her. She taught me how to love my own children, how to care for people. She was just a thoughtful person. And there is no way I could have come out of that toxic environment without her being by my side.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that came through loud and clear in your writing. And, one of the things that I think she really did was she encouraged you to just find your passion. Just go out and find, just go out and do it, whatever it is. And I'm going to support you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, led you to gymnastics because I think you found that was a passion.
Yes, she did. And let me tell you, there were a lot wilder things that I came up with in addition to gymnastics. And she was with me the whole way. So she gave me this sense that I could do anything, that whatever it was I had on my heart, just try it. It's okay. And if you fail or if you find that you don't like it, that's okay. You move on to the next thing. And I love that about her, that was one of the many things I loved about her, was that she was always for me. Always, always.
Well, I think that's a good parenting tip for all of us. And that you don't have to come from an affluent family. And your circumstance may not be the best compared to, maybe some of your neighbors or whoever you're hanging out with. But, if you're supportive of your children and help them to pursue the passions that they have as they're growing up, good things will happen, when they become adults. And so oftentimes I think people just get really focused on their current situation. I don't think your mother ever did that. I think she was always focused on the future.
Right. And she was focused on the future. She didn't allow her current circumstances to define that future. And not only did she dream for me, she continued to dream for herself. So she would take me when I was little into these Dale Carnegie classes, these night courses, and I would sit in the back with my coloring book and just, color while she's learning. And she encouraged me to not just settle. It's okay to want more than what you have now, not in a materialistic way, but in a way to have a better life, better experiences. And it was just beautiful.
Yeah, she was an exceptional person, and the influence that she's had not only on you, but I'm sure many others in your family and people that she just came in contact with. Probably she spawned a whole generation of leaders and people that have impact and are making a difference, just like you.
Yes, she was a great leader.
Yeah. So in your book, you write about the 7 steps from pain to purpose and overcoming the pain and hurt and that you've experienced in life. And, kind of on the leadership crucible, that's what we talk about a lot is, everybody's faced with challenges in their lives. And I don't care what circumstance you come from growing up and in your, professional life, but you're always going to face those issues that test you. And so can you speak to those seven points for us?
Sure. Well, the first point is acknowledge the pain. For so many years, I didn't acknowledge the pain. I knew that I had gone through a lot of pain growing up, but I thought that if I forgot about it, just squash it down, just don't even think about it. I'm good, and I could move forward successfully. But as I shared earlier, that wasn't the case. So a lot of times, I believe their leaders have a tendency to be people who have overcome some things, who've been able to push through, who've been able to make it happen anyway, who are resilient. And sometimes we live in that resilience, but we don't think about whether we need to deal with some of the things from our past. We don't think about whether we need to process some of those things and get healing from those things because they will surface. It's like trying to hold a ball or a balloon underwater. It's going to surface. And when it pops up, we want to be able to deal with that. So acknowledge the pain first, and then recognize your own mistakes. So you have some people who acknowledge the pain, but then they don't take responsibility for their own actions. So I can understand making certain decisions based off of being hurt in your past when you're younger. But as you get older, we need to start taking responsibility for those things and not use our past trauma or pain as excuses. And then there's forgiving others. That's number 3. Not forgiving someone. I've heard it said so many times, not forgiving someone is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So forgiving people is very important for the healing process. And it doesn't mean that you condone what that person has done. It doesn't mean that that individual should be allowed to continue to hurt you at all. But what it does mean, it means that you are releasing yourself from their control. Think about it. When someone does something to you and you choose not to forgive, every time that person walks in the room, every time that name is mentioned, this bitterness rises up. And then basically what we end up doing is we allow other people, that person that we're not forgiving, that person is still controlling us, controlling our emotions, controlling, our responses to certain situations. So forgiving others is for you. It's for you. And that's something that's very important. And then also, number 4, rediscover the true you. So it's asking yourself things like, who was I before I was wounded? What are my likes, dislikes, personality, talents? What happened when trauma changed me? So I believe that trauma, adversity, there's so many things that can steal who we are. And we become a different person because of those things. A kind person could become a more cynical person, because of what has happened. There's so many different examples we can give, but we want to really get back to who we truly are, because that is when we'll have our greatest success in life. And as leaders, especially when we get in touch with who we truly are, we'll be better leaders, and people will want to follow us.
Yep.
And then there's number 5, which is identify the stumbling blocks. So I mentioned a little earlier, there was, a lie that I was believing, that I had no voice. When we're in that healing process, we'll want to identify any stumbling blocks that we might have. And then those are things that will prevent us from being who we were designed to be. They could be a number of things. And then after we identify those stumbling blocks, then we replace them with what is true. And then number 6 is turning the stumbling blocks into stepping stones. Gosh, adversity and trauma, they are good examples of some stumbling blocks that we have. So that way we start to examine those negative things that we've experienced, and then we see if there's any good that can come from them. So sometimes when I think of adversity or trauma, sometimes those things can make us more resilient, more empathetic towards others. Sometimes it gives us our life mission because we've gone through something in particular. It may give us the desire to help other people who are going through the same thing or who have been through the same thing. And sometimes it's those things that we learn from adversity or trauma that can help lead us to our greatest success.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot in my profession, where people will go on a specific call, or an event happens in their life, and it places them on a trajectory that they would not have been on if it weren't for that event. They've used it to internalize maybe a new mission in their life, and that's a powerful thing.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
It really is.
And then my 7th and final point is, if at all, reconcile. If at all possible, reconcile. It can be very difficult to do. And sometimes you won't be able to reconcile. Sometimes it's not safe to reconcile. Sometimes that person has passed on and it's impossible to reconcile. I do believe that when you consider reconciling with someone, you want to make sure that it's safe, that it's not a dangerous situation. And we also want to check our own attitude. Sometimes we want to so-called reconcile because we want to, make them own up to what they were supposed to be doing. We want to make them own up to committing the crime or the harm or whatever that is. And we're not really looking for reconciliation. We're looking for payback. So we need to check who we are as well. I had the opportunity to reconcile with my father years later. And it was while writing my book. As I finished writing my book, I just was in a moment of prayer one morning, and the Lord placed on my heart that I needed to reconcile with my father in order to have a greater impact through the book. And so I had an opportunity to do that. And it was very difficult because I had a hard time tracking him down, and we hadn't spoken in years because he had not returned my calls. I had been reaching out to him. Me and my boys were little at that time, and we would leave messages on his phone. And birthday wishes and sing songs on his machine and everything. And he wouldn't respond. And I remember crying out to God, how am I going to reconcile with a man who doesn't even acknowledge that I exist? How do I do that? And so I just started to pray. I was like, there's nothing else I can do. And that was probably in January or February of that particular year. And then by November, I was sitting across from my dad in a restaurant for the first time, talking with him in years. And I told him about the book, and I told him, read to him all the pieces about him that I had planned to write. And I wanted to make sure that I remembered things properly. And I also wanted him to know that I wasn't sharing my story, our story, out of spite to make him look badly. But I was sharing our story because there were so many people that I was speaking to at the time, because I had been speaking to different audiences, from executives to the incarcerated. And every time I spoke, there were people who would come up to me afterwards with tears in their eyes who could relate and understood. And they were where I was. And it was healing for them. And I told my dad, I said, I tell our story because it's helping people. And he responded. He said, you know what? It's ugly. It's not good. But if it's helping people, then okay, I'm okay with you sharing that.
Yeah, I when I was reading your book, I could see two sides of your father. There was a side that was, kind of on the dark side a little bit. I mean, he kind of ran a tough life sometimes, but then there was this other side of him that when he would come back in, he was, a loving parent for a little bit, and then he would, kind of go off again. So I'm happy that you were able to reconnect with him and kind of reconcile that piece for you. I think that's very important and good advice on making that step to reconcile. Because as you said, it's if you don't do that, it's like 1,000 cuts to death almost. Mm-hmm. You use the analogy of you're drinking a little poison every day to take yourself out, right. And it is. I mean, if every time that something comes up, it just reminds you of that bad circumstance. So you have to reconcile that if you're going to move on. And that's true not only in personal life, but I think it's true from a leadership perspective as well. You can't harbor things that go wrong or go bad in your organization or when you're leading people, because if you do, you're not going to be a good leader.
Right. Forgiveness in leadership is important as well. I mean, you think about all the relationships you have with different people. And again, forgiving them does not mean you condone that you're okay with what they did. And it doesn't mean that you continue to let them hurt you. Trust needs to be developed after something happens. And if they are able to develop or to earn that trust back, then that's a good thing. But sometimes that's not always the case. And I have to say this, Randy, I reconciled with my father, and it worked out for a little over a year. And then it went back to him not responding to my calls again. So, and that was very hard. And so I went several more years trying to engage, wanting him to have a relationship with my children. And it just didn't happen. And I finally had to realize, you know what? You've done all you can do. So when you're reconciling with someone, it doesn't always work out the way you want it. But if you do your part, it takes two people. You do your part. And if they choose not to reciprocate, then we have to be willing to let that go. Yeah, it is. And then not take the blame for the reconciliation not happening the way we want.
Yeah. Don't internalize that it's your fault because, you made the effort. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So as we kind of wrap up today, I wanted you to share, if you could, some takeaways that you would tell someone to become a better person and maybe a better leader as they're moving through their life journey.
Mm-hmm. I think my takeaways, Randy, would be related to the past pain that we're talking about today. Because I believe that the past pain that we've experienced has effect on us as adults. And many times we don't realize it because we're so strong, especially as leaders. We're so strong. We push through, we make things happen. And then we find little glitches along the way. We find that there's some things that some hurdles that we have difficult time overcoming. And we wonder why, what is that thing that prevents me from reaching, whatever level that we're trying to reach. And sometimes we have to glance back into the past to move forward and process those things that we've been through in a healthy way. And sometimes we as leaders and people, everyone at some point may have some lies that they're listening to. And I like to say, you're listening to a lie when self-defeating thoughts continue to speak louder than your talents, your experience, and your accomplishments. And I'll say that again. You may be listening to a lie if self-defeating thoughts continue to speak louder than your talents, your experience, and your accomplishments. A lot of times we may have other people who believe in us and they see things in us that we aren't able to see for ourselves because we're listening to some lies. And then, so if you're finding that you're listening to lies, I think you can work on rejecting those lies by identifying what that lie is and where it came from. Then you replace that lie with what is true. And then surround yourself with safe people who can be there for you, to support you, encourage you, especially when it comes to using your voice as a leader. I encourage every leader to not lead in isolation. We need each other.
We absolutely do. And leadership is a team effort, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. It takes all of us to make an organization, a family, whatever we're leading to be successful. And so it takes all of us together, with that common vision and common mission to move forward collectively. And you can't do that when you're having these self-defeating thoughts and questioning every move that you make. So, yeah.
Yeah. And Randy, I will say this, we may not be able to talk with our team about those types of things, but if you get a group of other leaders who are peers to be able to process those things, what a healthy environment you can create for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I have always told many of my fire chief friends, as I said, the first thing that you do when you get promoted and you pin the fire chief badge on, you get three or four people that they can be mentors or they can just be sounding boards for you, because you're going to run into situations that you've never faced before. And these are people that you trust, that are confidants that you can call up and say, have you ever experienced this? Have you ever faced this situation? And have that confidential conversation and get some professional advice, if you will, before you just make your own decision based upon experience that you likely don't have.
That's very good. I'm all for it. I love that.
Well, Kim, thank you so much for being with me today on the Leadership Crucible podcast. And, you're just an amazing person, and it's just been a pleasure to get to know you. And, I hope our paths cross again very soon.
Thank you. It's been an honor. I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Crucible podcast. If you have a story of adversity you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it. Visit us at theleadershipcruciblepodcast.com And join us next time as we continue to explore how to live lives of success and significance.